And we are live. And now we have a very special guest today, and he's Dr. Brian Glibkowski. And actually, Dr. Brian is a very special researcher who actually, and he's a scholar. He is a recipient of the Emerald Citation of the Excellent Award. And his academic article was selected as one of the top 50 articles in the world from 15,000 management articles in 300 peer-reviewed publications worldwide. Dr. Glibkowski is a professor and CEO of Sampler Science, and actually he's specialized in the science of answering. It's instead we as coaches we ask about good questions. He was actually passionate about searching for quality answers, and he worked on something called came up with something that is called answer intelligence, and it's a framework that supports leaders, consultants, through and includes custom assessments and including workshops that helps organizations to work on enhancing communication, developing talents, and improving business outcomes. And actually, when I was introduced to Dr. Brian, I was really very fascinated by the way he was representing it in his TED talk. Actually, and then we connected together, and we had this the privilege of having you on board today. Welcome, Dr. Brian, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mohamed, for that gracious introduction as well. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, and actually, I believe that we had some. This is maybe our third or fourth meetup, I believe, and we had. Before meeting you, I went through lots of materials that actually was related to this. The term was really intriguing for me. What do we do with answers, and what is answering intelligence? What is different, so I just would like to see from your perspective, how did it start, focusing on this and putting this model that the also model that you brought into practice and into assessment, and putting this into awareness.
Yeah, great question. So as you mentioned, I've been in and out of academia, do research, and one of my streams of research was focusing on questions, and published some research on that. And one thing struck me as I was doing that research, that we know a lot about questions. We know there's the 6 WH questions: why, what, how, when, where, who, open and closed questions. And I remember thinking that in terms of answers, we don't have a parallel typology. How many answer types are there? There's less emphasis on answers. And as a society, we focus on questions, like you mentioned, in coaching. In sales, it's question methodologies. As you go to university, the professors focus on the research question. They don't say the research answer or answers. So that really intrigued me. And with some colleagues, I decided to research answers. We interviewed and did some research with the top golf instructors in the world. It's rated by Golf Digest and Golf Magazine, and came up with what we refer to as the answer intelligence framework. And maybe you could share that for the audience so they could see the visual of that. And essentially, it consists of 6 answer types: theory, story, concept, metaphor, procedure, and action. And the basic idea is each question relates to different answers that can be provided. And the reason answers are important, I like to summarize it in respect to questions, that questions are for curiosity, answers are for influence. So if you're going to influence others as a leader, you have to provide answers. Or if you think, going to a job interview, how do you get a job? I think ultimately you have to provide quality answers. So this is a framework for anyone that's interested in increasing their influence in important conversations across a wide range of areas, sales, executive coaching, leadership, teamwork, mentoring, etc. So that's how I got interested in answers, and since published a book on it called Answer Intelligence, Raise Your AQ.
Wow, and actually, I really love يعني when I followed your videos and understood, made the assessments, saw the results. It made a lot of sense why يعني actually I give up out sometimes irrelevant answers to some contextual issues. Especially, I knew that I'm very dumb at sales, so so how can leaders actually, and this is my first question, how is it important for leaders in the organizations and maybe people who are following us? How is it important for you to form this intelligence and how to develop it over time? And this is something I believe يعني that broad that makes this map makes a lot of sense to يعني when you elaborate further. Yeah.
Yeah, another great question. I think, especially with leaders, from my understanding, with the various executive coaches around the world I've spoken with, including you, Mohamed, oftentimes executive coaching engagements are focused on leaders and executive presence. And the ability to communicate effectively is very important. So, as a leader, you have to be purposeful with your answers. So, what this means for a leader is that this is a skills-based framework they can learn and apply for any conversation. So maybe I can tell you a quick illustrative story. We have an executive coach in the United States working with a client in Greece, an executive, and he suffered from lack of executive presence. He basically it was difficult for him to influence others. He rambled when he spoke, and didn't have real command of the answers he provided. So the executive coach worked with the executive to improve his executive presence and be purposeful with the answers. And an outcome of this, just a very specific example, there was turmoil in Greece in terms of some regulatory issues. And the executive coach worked with the executive to prepare for a meeting with the CEO. It was a 15-minute meeting. He needed to convey this turmoil. They developed a simple metaphor that there was this chaos in Europe was sort of like a pinball machine. And if they weren't careful, things were going to go on tilt. So the CEO got this metaphor almost instantly, and they spent the remainder of the 14 minutes of the conversation talking about solutions, which are other answers in the AQ framework. And then not only was that effective for that meeting, but the CEO then used that same metaphor in another executive meeting. So the point here is this executive was fielding the what question was in the room. What was wrong in Europe? And he used a metaphor to answer that. And so he was very purposeful and deliberate, and it was very effective. And just to sort of punctuate this point, I think we're all familiar with stories, but metaphors are another type of answer that's a relational answer that you can connect with someone. They're very compact, very simple, and very effective. So that'd be an example of one answer an executive leader could provide. But the point is, all these answers can be influential depending on the conversation and the questions that are important.
So they started from the story that you have told me, and actually they started from a concept and they developed a metaphor. That's what I can actually relate to, and this was something that answers the what of what they're trying to resolve or what they're trying to work on. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it's interesting. From my perspective, this is a circular structure. So there's
Yeah.
multiple ways to enter the 6 answers, and there's not a hierarchy. All of them are sort of equals, like a circle, not a pyramid. It's a circle. So, but you're right. You could enter conversations and think about things through concepts, and it's often a great way to start because particularly like if you're an executive coach working with a client, it's a good way to enter the discussion. So, for example, let's say you're speaking with a client about leadership. You may ask them, what is leadership? You're looking for their answers, or you may provide an answer of leadership. And for example, one common definition of leadership is inspiring people and holding them accountable. That's a concept answer. And once you know that concept answer, then you could relate it to the different answer types and help someone develop all the answers. So one of my favorite metaphors for leadership related to inspiring and holding people accountable is that it's like leadership is like a braided rope. When two ropes are separate, they're strong, but when they're braided together, they're even stronger. And you could say, that's how I lead. I inspire and hold people accountable in each meeting. So, there's an example where we started with concept. I'm able to understand it as a metaphor, and then so on and so forth. You could relate it to all the other answer types. So from a leader standpoint, it might be very important to communicate to others, what leadership is to them. If my subordinates know, if I'm a leader, that my leadership style is holding people accountable and inspiring people, it makes clear sort of the rules of engagement. It makes me clear and transparent as a leader, and it makes me more effective. So let me stop there. But you're absolutely right. You can start with concept and then go to any other answer. But you can also start with story and then go to any other answer. And that's part of the skill of being able to answer effectively and answer intelligence.
Depending on what your audience is searching, is it something that's related to a why, a what, or a how, right? Yani it's depending
Yeah.
on what level of conversation it is. Is it about the philosophy? Is it about what we understand, how we understand the world, how we relate to it? Is it about the subject itself? So here
Yeah.
we develop our answers and actually start. And actually here, Brian, when I thought about this, yani actually it came to me that I meet a lot of leaders who actually are stuck in one conversation type.
Mhm.
They are either too philosophical, so they're always in the theory place, in the why we do, and actually they're totally happy when everybody is aligned on the on the story or the theory. But in actions, it's very. I mean, they actually always complain about the actions and the understanding of their people on how to translate this. However, they meet at the values perspective, so they have the why, the theory, and the story of the organization is really very well embraced. However, it doesn't translate into, they fail in delivering the procedures and actions, the when and where, and translate this into concepts, the what, how to translate this why into something. So they're always feeling like as if they're in a very high kind of intellectual organization,
Yeah.
and sometimes I see some people who are actually very stuck in the details of the how, procedures, actions. This is the right actions, these are the right procedures, these are so and so. However, people lack the motivation or the way to move forward, or to relate this into a big meaning, into the why and the what, what are we talking about, why are we doing this, and what is it all about, and how does it actually connect with the client. So actually they fail to develop their employees in this part. So how can the a good how can we promote a good culture through a good culture of quality answering? This is something I
Yeah.
believe. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, you're bringing up a good point. I think at the center of it, first of all, is recognizing that individuals have preferred styles of communication. In AQ, we refer to these as answer styles that you may prefer as a communicator, always providing a story, or that the other party prefers. So in AQ terms, we call this high AQ practice 4, answering with style. So you look at the red, that's a relational style, preference for story and metaphor. Analytical is the yellow, preference for concept and theory, and practical is blue, preference for procedure and action. So a good starting point is knowing your own style. We all tend to have a style we prefer. Like for example, I'm very analytical, and when I would teach classes, I would oftentimes not give examples, or sometimes not even a textbook before. Not very practical in terms of procedures or actions. You have to know, where your weaknesses are. And the broader point is the expert communicators. We refer to them as Renaissance communicators, that are well-rounded. You can be a Renaissance communicator and use all the answer styles. Because, for example, let's say you're the CEO and we're coming out of COVID here to some extent, right? And we're let's say you're giving an all hands meeting discussion, talking about the future of the business and how people are going to work and where they're going to work. The why question may be first and foremost, and you have an excellent story to explain that. But people also are going to want to understand, how is this going to work? And as the CEO, you're not implementing at a detailed level, but you do need, for example, a how answer, a procedure, a simple high-level 3-step plan, perhaps, of how you're going to get from where we're at to where we're going. Because if as a CEO, you just focus on the analytical or the relational, but you don't give them that high-level procedure, they're going to have lack of confidence in what you're saying. And also they're looking for that how direction. So you can't abdicate your responsibility to provide all the answers. In this case, just sort of focusing on perhaps, the how question might be overlooked by certain, CEOs that you were sort of referencing in the beginning of your points there.
Yeah. So that's amazing, Brian. I really love, how you relate this, and actually, I believe it comes in from immense presence. That this executive presence, and I believe that there's a lot of training also. Somebody has to be mirroring, the quality of answers, and this is something I just want to know how we develop this in leaders. This is something I believe it's very important to understand. And the other thing on how to know the feedback, when I delivered the message, how can I know that the quality of answer actually was
Yeah.
related to the context? So I mean, these are two questions. It's very composite thing, but they're both in my mind, and just I wanted to
Yeah.
put them in the
Yeah.
field. Yeah.
Question one is, how do you learn this? And two is sort of like real-time feedback.
Yeah.
Question one, this is a skill you can learn. So there's a framework. There's the 6 answers. Knowing there's 6 answers. There's 5 high IQ practices. We mentioned the answer with style is high IQ practice 4. Learn those techniques. Second, you have to be a student of what is important to you. So if you say you're a great leader, you should cultivate multiple stories of your leadership. You should be clear on your theory. You should have multiple procedures of how you lead in different situations, like how do you lead a meeting versus how do you lead a one-on-one performance review, key actions. So you have to be a student of this, okay? It takes practice. And what I would relate this to is like practicing a sport, like European football or basketball. You have to practice. If you're doing basketball, you practice your passing, your shooting, and you're purposeful about that, right? You have proper form and technique. And if you're aware of what you're doing and you practice, you can improve. And I would say a comparable is sort of to everyone's experience is, say, job interviews. Perhaps many senior executives are sort of past some of their frenzied job interview days where you would oftentimes have 5 or 6 job interviews in a week or several a day. I think what you find when you go through a lot of job interviews is through repetition, you start to figure out what works, right? What stories work, what theories work. So you just got to start practicing, trying, and using it, and you're going to upskill. You're going to get better. The second question is sort of real-time feedback, and it's also being aware of others. So if I tell a story and your body language is receptive to the story, I know the story landed. If you're getting anxious, perhaps the story was too long, or maybe I gave the wrong answer. So it's interesting. Once you get into a conversation and you start using AQ, it's pretty quick to see that you're resonating with someone. And usually, as you start to move around to the different answer modes, the conversation becomes more and more comfortable because the other party understands you have a lot to say, you have command of the material. So I would say just be aware of the other party. Another thing you can do is be proactive in what we call meta conversation. So you might ask the person you're speaking with and say, great question. Would you like me to provide a story to answer that? And they're going to say, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Or they might say, no, I want you to, tell me something else. Give me a case study or tell me how it works. You have to decode a little bit sometimes the individual's responses because the AQ framework, is familiar, like story and metaphor, even concept. but like theory could be foreign for some people. Procedure and action we sort of know about, but in AQ terms, each of these answers mean very specific things. So you have to sort of understand what they want and guide them. Like, for example, theory in many executive circles, I wouldn't call it theory, I call it business strategy, right? I'd say, great story. Can you tell me how that relates to a business strategy? Or I just told you a story. Would you like me to connect this to a business strategy for you? And if they say yes, I give them that business strategy. So it's at first it might seem difficult or foreign, but once you start to use it, you realize it's fairly simple, and it's ultimately as simple as passing and dribbling in basketball. And if you're familiar and aware of what you're doing, you can do it the right way.
Wow. So that was profound, and there are many lessons here. While you were talking, I was just trying to grab some, some quotes, and about what you've said. And this, it's like, yes, it's as simple as grabbing and grappling and dribbling in basketball. However, not everybody knows how to play basketball. You need to
It's true.
upskill and see
Yeah.
the team dynamics and play with the bigger players. So I guess that it's something that's built over time. And actually, leaders will always stay in the shadows if they don't seek feedback on the quality of their answers. And they always blame their organization teams that they don't understand them, they don't relate to what they say, and it's coming out of the message and how clear it was, and how the answer, they're answering the correct questions in the proper manner. I guess this brings in better leadership presence and better leadership impact, I guess.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize one point. I think in terms of clarity, high IQ practice one is knowing there's 6 answers. A friend of AQ, Mike Sonke, is a recently retired McDonald's USA CFO, said about 50% of the value of AQ is just knowing there's 6 answers. And I think that's tremendous advice. And getting back to your point about, a leader maybe not being clear to others, I would say, first of all, a leader has to be honest and clear with themselves about those answers and challenge themselves. If you have an upcoming all hands meeting and you have some key points you want to convey, can you convey those key points in terms of 6 answers? Or here's an exercise all leaders, I think, will appreciate in terms of the sales organization. Can you communicate your value proposition as an organization in terms of 6 answers? Very challenging to do. But once you accept the challenge, you can really move forward in profound ways. For example, working with an organization, the sales leadership wanted their team to communicate their value proposition more clearly. They had a very complex product. The concepts were difficult to understand. So ultimately, what they realized is they didn't have effective metaphors. And they developed a portfolio of metaphors, and they were able to break through very quickly so the other party understood them. But, again, it's part of this overall process. As a leader, do you know the 6 answers yourself? Do you believe in them? And can you communicate them to others?
Great. Now we have a question, and it's that doesn't show the name of the and actually he's saying, or she is saying, hi to you both. When the leader recognizes his dominant style is not effective, what he or she could do to make a smooth transition to other style and feel genuine about it. And this is a very, this keyword of genuine is very important. So
that's a great question. So, for example, I'll use myself. For a long time as an academic, focused on theory and concepts, say negotiations, right? And what I found was the more I studied negotiation theory, so it starts with these concepts like win-win, and there's fancier terms in the literature like integrative negotiating and things like that. What I found is the more I learned about theory and concepts, the more I got interested in stories of effective negotiations. Like you might want to Google like the 2 sisters in an orange and how they shared an orange. That's a story, and I won't get into that. But the point is, I started with analytical, But because I cared about the topic so much, I started to get interested in all these stories and metaphors. And then I got interested in procedures and actions of how you negotiate, different techniques like log rolling and multiple offers and things like that. So I think if you're genuinely interested in something and you're going to come from your domain that you're most comfortable with, you can build to these other areas and get just as excited about the other areas. Because ultimately, at some level, everything's connected. Like effective procedures and actions in negotiations only work because they're consistent with the theory and concepts of negotiating. So I think there's this sort of upward spiral. If you're committed to something and you're interested in it, all of a sudden that interest grows and broadens, and it can work with all the answer styles. I think sometimes when we say we're a certain answer style, like we like to tell a story and we're story and that's sort of who we are, we get so trapped in defining ourselves in terms of stories, we forget sort of the underlying messages we're trying to convey and use. So I would say, follow your passion. If you're interested in something, you'll be able to communicate it broadly. And I've seen this with executives over and over again. Like, for example, here's an opposite answer of understanding something. Like, take employee engagement. You talk to executives that have no interest in employee engagement, ask them how you define it, and they have no answer. You ask them what are some procedures and actions you're doing, they really don't have any answers. And they might point to like one story or something about engagement being important. But those executives that really get it, all the answers start to roll off their tongue. When you're an expert, you understand all the answers. So they're going to say, for example, if you ask me, what is engagement? I'm going to be excited as a leader, and I'm going to say, engagement is inspiring engagement is thinking about the job, cognitive engagement, physical engagement, the energy to do the job, emotional engagement. When the company does well, I'm excited. When it does poorly, I'm sad. They understand it. So that's my response to you is, if you're interested in something, you'll find naturally you start to gravitate to all these answers.
Wow, that's an amazing answer, Brian. That's really, I really enjoyed the even this idea of the upward spiral and being committed towards. This was really the real towards that really connected with me. The actually, I checked on LinkedIn. The question was coming in from Noel Torres. And so thank you, Noel, for this question. It was brilliant, really, and it's opened up a gate for us all to learn. So I believe that this is really time is actually running up, and I'm really when the clock ticks that the 26th minute, I normally ask my guests. So what are you offering now? I believe that you're offering for our audience a free assessment on your website. So can you talk to us more about it? That would be great.
Yeah. So this is it's called Explore AQ. So AQ is a new concept, and you can take this assessment and you can take it in terms of different topics. So sales AQ, interview AQ, coaching AQ, and you can test your AQ knowledge about question and answer mapping and how you answer. And when you do this, you get a score. And more importantly, you get a custom 10 plus page PDF report that introduces you to AQ and how you can improve your answers. So it's free. I encourage you to take it, and look forward to many of you doing that.
Yeah, and actually, I did it on both sales and coaching. I found myself as brilliant. I'm on top of the mountain on coaching. When I came to sales, I was in this kind of so but actually it was very the experience itself of the assessment was really for me it was a learning experience. I felt it highlighted what's happening here, how stupid I am. So so it was really enlightening. So I encourage everybody actually to take this assessment, and it has different actually sales coaching, and I believe there's mentoring or leadership.
Yes.
Right. Yes, and it's really amazing, and it's really very generous of you, Brian. So, as a closing word before we just land this 30 minutes interview, and maybe you can actually schedule. I believe that this is just one of a big series to come, right? Or will we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're interested in doing a follow-on session, so I would love
please.
to.
Yeah.
Very generous. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
So,
So, what would you like to
final
maybe
thought.
summarize to everyone who was watching us today?
Yeah. So the final thought, I think, um, is just to reiterate something I said in the beginning. Questions are for curiosity, answers are for influence. If you want to be an effective communicator, the broader message of AQ is to embrace questions, but also embrace answers. I think when you fully embrace questions and answers, then you're a fully effective communicator. So that's my wish for you.
And that's amazing. And actually, this is yani, one thing we learn from you, and with the many different things I learned during this, short period that I've been introduced to you and your work. And really, thank you, Brian, for this amazing interview. And I really enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you. And I
But
hope that everyone really reflects on how we answer questions. It's really, yani, it really brings up the conversation and the message to a total different level. And it has been a joy and a pleasure and a privilege to have you on board. And thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone who was watching us. And meet again, inshallah, with another episode on Answer Intelligence with Brian. Once we get the date, I will tell you. Okay, thank you. Okay,
great.
bye bye. Thank, bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.